By chance, I happened across a Jaclyn video in which she tries to refute Dennis Prager on metaethics. In 2017, Jaclyn breaks new ground for YouTube atheists by asserting that morality is subjective. Likewise, Dennis Prager, in an attempt to keep things fresh, decided to rile up atheists by saying that morality is objective and can only be objective if God exists. Positing that morality can only be objective if God exists is not what earns the ire of the rationalists who are actually sloppy empiricists. No, it's simply saying that morality is objective. Because Glenn continuously interrupts Prager with misguided quips, I'm going to explain their views for them for the sake of clarity. Of course, I encourage others to look at their videos to see what they have to say in their own words. Also, before I address Glenn's arguments, I need to mention that her video was hardly the only response to Prager, and it definitely wasn't the worst, since Glenn and many of the atheists who responded to Prager made similar points. My criticism will extend to their arguments as well. And to her credit, she kept her declaration of subjectivism under 20 minutes, which is plenty of time to say that the morality of slavery is a matter of mere opinion. Lastly, this playlist shows that the world is not just.
Is murder wrong?
In my opinion, subjectively, yes it is. But I guess you have to give context, because most people who think murder is wrong will gladly support war.
Is it evil? Nearly everyone would answer yes.
Apparently not everyone, because I think the concept of evil is bullshit.
Stop! Fucking stop!
In his video, If There Is No God, Murder Isn't Wrong, Prager espouses divine command theory in every way but in name. Divine command theory is a metaethical theory, and as such, it is concerned with the nature of morality. Delving into issues of metaethics is more about offering an analysis of morality itself, rather than directly addressing normative theories or matters of applied ethics. Divine command theory is generally understood as action X is moral if and only if God commands it, and X is immoral if God commands against it. So God's commands are both necessary and sufficient for an act to be moral or immoral. If there is no God to issue commands, and divine command theory is correct, then nothing is moral or immoral. Glenn's view is that morality is subjective. What is moral or immoral is a matter of mere opinion or preference. This too is a metaethical theory. Subjectivism, her view, can be understood as action X is moral if and only if an individual approves of it. When Glenn says mass murder is immoral, she's simply saying that she personally disapproves of mass murder. When she denounces mass murder, the structure is much like her preference for a particular flavor of food. It's dependent on whims. Now, I could be wrong about Glenn's position, as she seemingly bounces between a subjectivist theory, moral truths are dependent on individuals, and an intersubjectivist/relativist theory, moral truths are dependent on culture or society. Anyway, for the purpose of this video, I'm assuming Glenn is a subjectivist, and I will address her relativist or quasi-relativist arguments when she gives them. Both Glenn and Prager have metaethical views that are burdened with problems. In fact, they both face similar challenges because Prager is, whether he realizes it or not, espousing a subjectivist theory as well. Under his view, morality is subject to an individual's commands, and because of this, not a matter of mind-independent facts. What is moral is determined by an individual's will, which is not unlike Glenn's position. However, according to Prager, the individual happens to be God instead of any individual. For Prager's theory, if God commands murder, then murder is moral. For Glenn's theory, if she approves of murder, then murder is moral. As it should now be obvious, they face similar challenges.
The problem with this is that morality is very subjective and very much dependent on the time and place in which you live. The morals that people have today might not be the morals they have in 100 years, and the morals we have today are certainly not the morals we had 100 years ago. Why? Because objective morality doesn't exist. It's entirely subjective and, like I said, dependent upon the time and place in which you live, the people that you surround yourself with, what is expected from you by society.
This is a ubiquitous and weak argument for moral subjectivism or relativism. Simply because people have changed their minds or have disagreed on what is moral or not, it does not follow that morality is relative to whatever people think is moral. If morality is defined by a culture's attitudes, then slavery was moral not so long ago in America. This would mean that supporting the abolition of slavery would have been immoral during this time. Equally the case, permitting same-sex marriage was immoral only a few years ago, given our cultural beliefs. If Glenn truly believes that fighting for the equality of an oppressed group is immoral because it opposes the majority's beliefs, then that's her bullet to bite. Even if she chooses to eat Ted Nugent's weekly ammo supply, she still needs to argue her way out of the non sequitur she's presenting. Again, even if it's the case that we disagree on what is moral or not, whether it's between individuals, groups, or people of different times, how is it the case that morality is subjective or intersubjective? If people disagreed on or changed their minds about the shape and age of the earth, does this mean the shape and age of the earth is subjective? Of course not. Glenn is giving a non sequitur argument, and it should be rejected. Descriptive relativism is not enough to secure metaethical relativism. Glenn and those inclined to scientism might say, but the shape and age of the earth is physically demonstrable, whereas morality is not. Even if I grant that moral truths cannot be demonstrated like truths concerning the shape and age of the earth, this does not make their argument any less faulty. This is a matter of bad reasoning, and it is the case that the premise does not support the conclusion. If people disagreed on whether 2 + 2 = 4, this would not make it a matter of opinion. If people disagreed on what constitutes knowledge, which they do, this does not mean that knowledge is whatever people decide it to be. Glenn and her cohorts need more premises and better arguments to support their contentious position. I won't hold my breath, though, as the skeptic community is happy to just keep asserting that morality is subjective without ever offering a decent defense of their position.
Oh, and realise how before I said many societies don't condone rape? That's because there are a few that do. Once again showing how morality is subjective. Oh, and the whole slavery and Jewish Holocaust thing? Human rights, dude. Because honestly, I can debate all day why morality is subjective and not objective.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear any of that. I got lost in thought. I was thinking about just beating somebody's head in with the back end of a rifle.
Every atheist philosopher I have read or debated on this subject has acknowledged that if there is no God, there is no objective morality.
Prager has read a few atheist philosophers then, and I find his ignorance or dishonesty on this point far more contemptible than anything Glenn has to say in her video. No doubt there are some atheist philosophers who hold or have held this view, but if Prager is being honest, then he's not well read when it comes to ethics. Whether it's arguing for or against moral realism in contemporary metaethics, the existence of God is not a popular reason to posit. Against moral realism, there are not many atheist divine command theorists out there. For moral realism, there are plenty of philosophers, some being atheist, some not, giving or believing secular accounts of objective morality. Prager could throw a dart at a scattered pile of papers on the topic. Wherever it lands, it's likely to prove his unfounded assertion wrong.
I feel like he's trying to trick viewers by using this word objective that people may or may not be familiar with. So let me explain it really quick, okay? Objective morality is kind of a claim that there is a set standard of morals that applies for everyone across every area, across every time zone. It is the objective. What is right and wrong has been and always will be the same. Subjective morality is basically whenever you admit that morality is, like I said, a product of the time and place that you live, and something that you have basically decided that is the norm so that you can survive and function as a member of society. But whenever he says atheists think there's no objective morality, if people don't know this difference, they might just be hearing, and I think he's banking on this, that they're just hearing atheists don't believe that there is such a thing as morality. And that's absolutely not the case.
Here, Glenn smuggles in some normative claims into her definition of subjective morality. There's nothing entailed by subjective morality that would mean one ought to choose what is moral in order to function and survive as a member of society. If I value the dismantling of society, dysfunction, chaos, the destruction of my own well-being and everyone else's well-being, then on what grounds can the subjectivists disagree with these values of mine? I realize Glenn prefaces this claim with basically, but it's still a problem. It seems to be more of a lazy safeguarding by Glenn to keep some of the untenable conclusions of her theory from coming forward. She's attempting to somehow subjectively but not subjectively defend her position's superiority over objective morality. This leads to another value judgment by Glenn, which is that subjective morality is better than objective morality.
Judeo-Christian values are predicated on the existence of a God of morality.
Right, of course, the same God of morality that just likes to randomly drown everyone.
If someone thinks randomly drowning everyone is moral and morality is subjective, then what's Glenn's point? If they don't have her preference for not randomly drowning everyone, then what is it that Glenn hopes to accomplish? Does she think her preference holds for others under similar circumstances for similar reasons? If so, then she's beginning to undermine her subjectivism. If she thinks most people already have this preference, whether they acknowledge it or not, and she's trying to bring it to light, well, this does nothing for the people who genuinely do approve of randomly drowning others. When she confronts these people, she can't even say that she disagrees with them, as it's impossible for one's preference to disagree with another person's preference. In other words, Glenn's position precludes genuine moral disagreement. Here's an example. Jaclyn Glenn, a time traveler from the 18th century, thinks slavery is moral. I think slavery is immoral. Normally, the propositions slavery is moral and slavery is immoral cannot both be true. However, under moral subjectivism, the propositions actually state Jaclyn Glenn approves of slavery and Indy disapproves of slavery. These propositions do not contradict one another, as they are referencing individuals' subjective states. As such, they can both be right. Much like our preferences for different tastes, our moral beliefs cannot be in genuine disagreement under moral subjectivism. Our desires may create conflict, but we are each ethically infallible. Philosopher James Rachels explains the problem with this view in the following. When one person says X is morally acceptable and someone else says X is morally unacceptable, they are obviously disagreeing. However, if simple subjectivism were correct, then they would not be. Therefore, simple subjectivism cannot be correct. This argument seems to show that simple subjectivism is flawed.
In other words, only if there is a God who says murder is wrong, is murder wrong?
Or, whenever God says that murder isn't wrong, like whenever he instructs people to murder other people for things like, I don't know, being gay.
Yet she has to accept that a culture that permits murdering people for being gay is entirely moral for that culture. In what world is ISIS acting morally by throwing gay people from a rooftop? She's rightfully pinning moral atrocities on Prager's view, but she fails to see how her criticism equally applies to her. At the end of the day, Glenn's view is that the Holocaust and slavery can be, and actually were, moral for some people.
Now, let me make two things clear. First, this doesn't mean that if you don't believe in God, you can't be a good person.
Duh. Thank you for pointing out the obvious.
There are plenty of kind and moral individuals who don't believe in God and Judeo-Christian values.
If you're saying that you can be moral without God, doesn't that just, kind of debunk everything that you previously said? Hey, how can you be a moral person without God? But hey, if you don't have God, you can be a moral person. What? Make up your damn mind.
Prager specifically said that you don't have to believe in God in order to be a good person. What he did not say is that one can be a good person if there is no God. Prager is arguing metaethics. He's arguing that God is required to give an atheist's moral acts any meaningful content other than mere opinion.
It is also not a coincidence that the first societies in the world to abolish slavery, an institution that existed in every known society in human history, were Western societies rooted in Judeo-Christian values.
The Western societies rooted in Judeo-Christian values were the societies that had slaves to begin with. In fact, Oftentimes the Bible was used to justify slavery. There are verses in the Bible that condone slavery. How is he missing this? It's awfully convenient.
And so were the first societies to affirm universal human rights, to emancipate women.
Okay, all right, I've already gone into the things that the Bible condones, like murder, slavery, and let's not forget it was pretty misogynistic. So to use the Bible and religion, which has historically been pretty oppressive of women, to say that that was the reason women got their rights is just kind of blowing my mind right now. The mental gymnastics, fuck, A+.
Glenn is obviously right that the Bible, along with other religious texts, have been used to condone all sorts of acts from mass murder to slavery to sexism. In fairness to theists, it's also been used to prohibit these acts as well. Still, whereabout in the Bible is the establishment of human rights by God? One can find plenty about permitting different forms of slavery, but there's little, if anything, on establishing human rights. Again, to be fair to theists, perhaps an interpretation of Scripture can allow for rights, but I sincerely doubt that Prager is up for this challenge.
Today, the rejection of Judeo-Christian values and moral absolutes has led to a world of moral confusion.
It seems like this concept of objective versus subjective morality, this idea of a definite good versus a definite bad or evil, is this thing that religious people just cling to. And I don't go along with that. I'm sorry, I just disagree with that. I think it's all very subjective. It is all opinion. And I'm really thankful when people don't base those opinions off of the Bible, because if we did actually follow what the Bible said to do, we would live in a pretty immoral world. Whenever I debated that preacher, he kept trying to get me on this point, and it just didn't work.
Do you believe in absolutes?
Moral absolutes?
Period.
It depends on what do you mean?
Do you believe in moral absolutes?
Like objective morality?
Right.
No. Because if there were some kind of objective morality, some like clear line between right and wrong that everyone just knew, then there wouldn't be so much debate. Even within Christianity, there are a lot of Christians that can't collectively agree on issues like gay rights, abortion, divorce. I feel like that kind of disproves it.
There's a lot of disagreement and debate in the sciences, mathematics, and every branch of philosophy, from logic to epistemology. So are these purely subjective too? Disagreement is not restricted to ethics, and disagreement is not a sufficient reason as to why something would be subjective. As I have already argued, genuine moral disagreement would be impossible under subjectivism. So, if anything, this favorite argument of the YouTube atheist/skeptic community is self-defeating.